Are you still quoting 30-year-old movies? Have you said cool beans in the past 90 days? Do you think Discover isn't widely accepted? If this sounds like you, you're stuck in the past. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. Welcome to the now. It pays to Discover. Learn more at discover.com/credit card, based on the February 2024 Nielsen report.
We're hitting that time of year when we begin recreating in our city's most accessible waterway, the Willamette River. But it wasn't always like this. Our city's relationship with the Willamette has taken on many forms throughout history, from aiding the industrial boom to functioning as a literal sewer. The Willamette, she's been through a lot. And many of us see her every day, but don't realize just how much it's shaped modern-day Portland. So today on CityCast Portland, we're revisiting a conversation with our resident Oregon historian, Doug Kenck-Crispin, about the Willamette River's wild past. It's Monday, June 2nd. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Doug, nowadays you give cruise ship tours of the Columbia River, which means you spend a lot of time on the water. Do you get to spend much time on the Willamette?
Yeah, a little bit of time. One of the cruise ship groups that I work for, they do dock in the Willamette, kind of in the south waterfront area, but it's pretty limited. Most of my time is kind of spent on the Columbia. That wasn't always the case, though. You know, I grew up towards St. John's in North Portland, kind of by the University of Portland. And when I was a kid, during the summers, inevitably every day, we would kind of go down the side of the cut, as we called it, down the bluff by the Coast Guard station there, and we'd go swimming in the Willamette every day. Just kind of little river rat North Portland kids, which is just disgusting when I think about it now. You know, I can't tell you how many times I got home. My mom was like, "Get your butt in the shower. They just dumped a bunch of raw sewage in that river. How many times have I told you?" But without fail, we would be in that river every single day.
I love that you were swimming like pre-big pipe.
Yeah, that's kind of nar.
That is so OG. All right.
Yeah, old school.
Well, like, what are your favorite things about the Willamette specifically?
Yeah, I just love that it really is this living, thriving river that we have in the middle of this city. You know, and the city's always been built around the river. That's why we're here. You know, if it wasn't for the Willamette River, there would not be a Portland, there would not be an Oregon City, and so on and so forth. But I love the fact that, you know, we can go down to the banks of the Willamette River now, and we can find rocks with poetry on them, and we can see some witches paddling past, and all these neat things that we have that just remind us that this is a living river. You know, it's not just this industrial dumping ground that it was for decades.
Right. Well, let's talk about some characteristics of the Willamette, because I don't think many people actually know how big it is, like where it starts, all that stuff. Could you give us the geography?
Sure. The Willamette comes from kind of the mountains and the hills around Eugene. Waldo Lake gets credited as being kind of the headwaters, but of course it's from a lot of runoff from that area as well. It travels about 300 miles to where it comes to the confluence with the Columbia River, which you know, it's towards Sauvies Island, so people may have been there in the summer with or without clothing. It's one of those beaches. So,
yeah.
you know, so it's absolutely a part of the Columbia River watershed, you know, but the Willamette watershed itself is about 11,500 square miles, so about 12% of Oregon. So pretty large portion of the state kind of takes up the Willamette Basin, which of course then drains into the Columbia there. So pretty phenomenal water system, of course, that we have in the Pacific Northwest here. And the Willamette is to not be forgotten in its contribution to all of it.
Have you heard of Willie Levinson from the Human Access Project?
No.
We've had him on the show before, and he's brought up that the Willamette was a huge swimming spot before it turned into an open sewer, which was your times. Want to talk us through the history from a swim spot to an open sewer?
Sure. You know, and I mean, I think when you look at this area, let's say downtown Portland, right? That area was really settled because it was going to be a good docking spot for the river traffic. So, I mean, you look at day one, and here we are, Portland and Oregon City are really competing with each other to decide who is going to be the port of call. Because you have San Francisco, And then after that, what do you have? Astoria. So, they really, really wanted this to be an industrial center. So that's kind of the genesis of this spot. Now, if you look back to the native peoples, there were people who would stay in kind of downtown Portland that we know today. They called it the clearing. It was a little spot if you were going between Oregon City and, say, Fort Vancouver during the fur trapper days that you could stop off and have a rest. You can cook your lunch there, maybe take a nap, something like that. But there was a lot of bugs. So weren't a lot of people that were really kind of into that area for quite some time. But once it started booming, it really did. And of course, the sewage is kind of the big spot that everybody's attention is drawn to, and rightfully so. And that's where we dumped all the sewage in the early days. Even that's where we got our drinking water too, which is kind of gross.
Ew.
Sylvester Pennoyer was kind of one of my least favorite mayors of Portland. He'd originally been the governor of Oregon, and a bill had come up for the Bull Run water project to try to get some money for that. And he actually vetoed a request for a $500,000 bond to finance the construction. He said that the glacier water for the Bull Run would cause goiter in the fairer of the Portland sexes, right?
What? Oh my God.
So, so eventually, what they did do was they did make the Bull Run, the municipal water supply.
He was a man of science, is what I'm hearing.
Well, maybe. But when he was mayor, he actually got a chance to drink the Bull Run's first water, in the dedication ceremony. He had a goblet, and he had a taste of it, and he set it down and he said, "No flavor, no body. Give me the old Willamette." So apparently people really did love that tinge that you might have to the Willamette. Yeah, I know, it's gross. It's gross, but that's where we were living, So I think if you look back to the swimming hole days, yes, it was a swimming hole, but really it was industry. That's what it was all about.
Mm-hmm.
Paper mills, pulp mills, all sorts of industry up and down the river, just dumping everything into the water, unfortunately.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, the changes that led to a cleaner Willamette River. You can see over 50 large-scale Jurassic World dinosaurs, props, and scenes made from over 6 million Lego bricks in Jurassic World by Brickman, now open at the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. The exhibition will also give Lego and Jurassic World fans opportunities to put their creativity and engineering skills to the test, with activities including island building, creating new dinosaurs, and even building escape vehicles to get away from a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And this isn't just an exhibit, it's an immersive, interactive, and thrilling journey through the stories and characters you love from the Jurassic World franchise. Learn more at omsi.edu, that's omsi.edu. There are some big home games coming up this month for the Portland Timbers right here at Providence Park, like their Pride Night on June 8th when they're playing against St. Louis. They have a few surprises planned for the night, including a live drag show. And when you purchase a ticket for June 8th's Pride Night, it will come with a really super sweet limited edition scarf. I've seen them and they're really well designed. On June 13th, you can cheer the Timbers on as they play against the San Jose Quakes at their Spirit of 75 night. That's when they'll be honoring the inaugural North American Soccer League Timbers team that started playing in 1975. The evening will feature a halftime recognition ceremony honoring players from that very team, and you can be there to experience it all. Go grab your tickets now at timbers.com. That's timbers.com. I heard our previous Governor Tom McCall put out a documentary in the 60s highlighting just how bad the river had gotten. It's called Pollution in Paradise. I was wondering, do you think that had any influence in the 20-year Big Pipe project completed in 2011, which now prevents combined sewer overflows to the Willamette River? Do you think it was like a slow burn to the Big Pipe project? Or because it was like the 60s and, it started I don't know, the 90s,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the technology was there when McCall conceived of it, when McCall was kind of talking about Pollution in Paradise, which is a really good documentary, by the way. It's on YouTube. People should watch it. if they get a chance. It's slow. They did documentaries a little bit differently then, very slow, but nonetheless, very good information in it. So I don't know if the technology for the big pipe was there yet, but I mean, I know that McCall was absolutely committed to cleaning up that river. He wanted to maintain industry. He wanted to keep the economy kind of chugging along, but he did want to kind of harken back to that era of when you could access the river. It's important for people to remember that the river used to flood every year. In April, May, June is when a lot of that high water would come, and downtown Portland would flood. I mean, the Great Flood of 1894, it went all the way up to the Central Library now. If you can picture kind of where the river is and how far up that is, at 10 blocks.
Wow.
So every year it would flood, but then they built in that seawall that we see today. They do call it a seawall, that area there to kind of control how high the water could go. And it's been pretty effective. They updated it in the 1940s. But pretty much from that time on, when they put in that seawall, there really wasn't much access to the river, especially when they built kind of some of the roads. Harbor Drive is one of them that came along that spot. So it wasn't until the 1970s that what we today call Tom McCall Park, the waterfront park there, really started opening up and giving people access to the river like they used to enjoy back before that seawall went in the 1920s. So absolutely, kind of how can we maintain industry but kind of curtail the negative effects so we can have a lovely water experience? It's something that we've been really toying with for decades here.
This is one of the only cities that I've been to that has this really beautiful active waterfront and not much waterfront. I always wondered what the history of that was, and this makes sense because, I live in St. John's, you grew up in St. John's. How awesome would it be if Cathedral Park had more of a waterfront? Went out, because there's a lot of empty buildings here now, and we had coffee and beer and food, and people could come here on their boat and dock, and we could, provide that and be super fun. And I feel like that is not the thinking that created our river coastline, I suppose. But I realize now why. Just hearing you speak about this, I'm like, oh yeah. So if it's always flooding, yeah, nobody wants that,
Right, exactly. Because of, again, it was sewer, the nasty cakey material that would get left in the streets once that water receded. Well, we all know what that was. So it was just gross. It was a public health issue. The city club said that the Willamette was dirty and unattractive.
It smelled. That's what I've heard.
Smelled too. Absolutely. Yeah. So pretty unpleasant. But of course, today, as more and more steps take place, is getting to bring us to that point that we really do enjoy that river. And, a lot of the technologies that we had, a lot of the industries just kind of gone away. We don't have that paper mill processing like we used to have, in the 70s and 80s. Thank goodness. I mean, you used to drive down to Camas and it would smell like farts. I mean, that was just kind of like, Albany smelled like farts.
That's Tacoma.
Yeah, exactly. Tacoma.
That's Tacoma aroma.
The smell of money up there. Yeah. But, it's kind of... So I think a lot of that has gone away, or moved other places so that we're able to now kind of actually spend some time and focus on this river.
Well, what are some of the most unexpected and wildest stories that you've learned in your research of the river's history? This is when you shine, Doug.
Yeah, I think I look a lot back on just kind of how this town was built upon this seasonal labor that was in here, and a lot of the stories that have kind of evolved about the Shanghaiing and all the kind of skullduggery. I mean, the tunnel stuff has been... I'm going to say has been proven to be absolutely nonsense, but the real genesis of this story is that men were coming to this town looking for work. And a lot of times they'd really get kind of conned because a lot of the work was built around the river, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people would try to entice them to come on their sailing ships. And then, again, if you're some sheep farmer, 16-year-old kid from Umatilla, and you came to Portland because you wanted to see the electric lights and you heard they had an elephant there, you never seen an elephant before, it's pretty easy for some well-dressed man with a silver-tipped cane to convince you, hey, buddy, you want to see the world? You want to see what's going on out there? And you end up working on a boat for really crappy pay. You have to live below decks and that kind of thing. So that kind of thing did happen. Absolutely.
Can you give us one story, one specific story?
Yeah.
That you've found out about the river and you're just like, oh, shoot.
Well, there is the story of the Snug Harbor Saloon, which was a bar that was right next to an undertaker. So the story has come up that, Bunko Kelly was a crimp that was looking for 24 souls, and he came by and he noticed that the doorway there to the basement in the sidewalk was open, and there was this odd kind of fog spilling out across it, so he cracked it all the way open and he went down below, and, there were 24 men, odd, that exactly the number he was looking for. And they were all passed out and drunk, and they were around all these barrels in the basement of the Snug Harbor Saloon. Well, they thought it was the Snug Harbor Saloon, but it was actually the adjoining business, which is Johnson and Son Undertaking Parlors, and the men were drinking embalming fluids, right?
No.
Yeah. So
Did they die?
pretty quickly. Well, they were on their way there, and some of them were breathing their kind of last heavy gasps. And so Bunko hailed some cabs, and some taxis there, and he loaded these men to him, and he took them on down to the ship that was waiting there, for the 24 men, and he quickly got them on board. And, the captain was pretty impressed, saying that he'd never seen so many men so dead drunk at once. Right. So it paid Bunko his money, and Bunko put the money in his pocket and quickly got off the ship. Now, once they got down to Astoria, it was found that all the men were dead. So this was kind of one of those stories that's really lived through the ages. They tell it on the Shanghai Tunnel tours, kind of telling just kind of how nefarious everything was, but you kind of dig into it a bit, and, there's nothing in the papers about it, which again, 24 dead dudes down in Astoria would have made at least a ripple in the papers. So
yeah,
it's kind of hard to identify that one. But another one that is fairly consistent in the tales is a madam that used to run her house of ill repute on a sternwheeler in the Willamette River, because she would go kind of between East Portland and what we called at that time Portland, kind of riding the line between the two in terms of where the jurisdiction would lie. So that's another one that, kind of used the river for, again, kind of these ill repute stories as well. I love how it's really kind of nefarious, all these tales you get. And you never get the tales of, and then we loaded wheat bags on board that ship for 14 days and it kind of sucked, but dinner was good, which I'm sure there's a heck of a lot more of those stories out there than, but the nefarious ones, of course, are the fun ones. So
those are the ones I asked for.
There we go. Exactly.
Well, is there anything that we didn't ask you, Doug, that you're like, oh, people should know about this or about the river?
I think we have a hard time kind of conceptualizing what the river was really like, before all the dams. We've got over 450 dams in the Columbia River water basin. When you look at the number of dams that are on the Willamette River, there's the Willamette Valley system with the Army Corps of Engineers has 13 dams. And then Bonneville has 8 dams across the Willamette substations. So I think it's really hard for us to kind of conceptualize what a free-flowing river would have really looked and sounded like in this city, how much it would have fluctuated with the seasonality of the high waters and so on. So I think that those are some of the things that, being on the river, on the Columbia as well, I like to kind of wake up in the morning and just kind of picture what would this look like if it wasn't just kind of this slow moving body of water that we're used to today, where every single drop of water is regulated by many different organizations to determine when it should flow down through. So I'd love to see it just flowing free for a couple of weeks if we could even conceptualize that.
But Doug, that's when everything got flooded.
Well, there you go. That's the downside.
Doug, you want chaos. You want chaos.
All those basement Airbnbs in Portland. Oh, my goodness.
You just want the dirty waters of the Willamette to wash our sins away.
Exactly. Get in the shower.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for hanging out with us.
You bet. Thanks for having me. It's great. I love getting on and chatting about the local history with you guys. And hopefully we can have some more conversations in the future.
All right, before we head out of here, I just want to give a big thanks to Chelsea C., Sean S., Charles M., Rob C., Shannon G., Lauren H., Asha M., Jonathan C., Nisha S., Michael L., Therese S., and Laura J. for joining as CityCast Portland neighbors during our spring drive. I'm sure your mugs are on their way, and you too can become a member and enjoy ad-free listening and other member perks like members-only events by heading over to membership.citycast.fm. That's membership.citycast.fm. Thanks. Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, See you at Slim's.